Welcome to the panel event on work on climate success stories. And just please remember to mute yourself if you join. And I just wanted to welcome all of our panelists today, Lena, David, Sylvia, and Paul. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're having a great day. And why don't we just start off with a quick introduction on work on climate. So in case you encountered this event from outside of the community, we are a Slack-oriented or Slack-based group that is trying to help people transition into climate-oriented work. And today what we are going to do is speak with a few members from our community who are active, who have made that transition, and just have them share their advice, any inspiration that they might have had in making this transition, and just share any tips that they might have for all of the rest of us who are trying to make that or retread that path or have that journey as well. So why don't we start with something pretty fundamental, which is, can you just tell us a bit more about how you're working on climate in your current role? Perhaps we can start off with Lena.
Utkarsh, can I be not the first one?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Maybe let's start with David then.
Totally, yeah. So I am the head of operations and business development at GreenSpark Software, which is a modern workflow software to help scrapyards improve their operations and sort of manage from end to end throughout the life cycle of their product. So to give a little bit more detail, basically a scrapyard has to acquire, scrap metal. They have to do something to that metal, and then they have to sell it somewhere. They have to pawn it off, and we basically help them trace that metal from beginning to end, and in doing so help them sort of manage their capacity and just be a little more up to date. And it's just an industry that has needed a bit of an update for a bit of time, and so our tool is actually just is green in the sense that it really is improving operations for these scrapyards, and in doing so, hopefully they can take on more load and sort of minimize the need for virgin metals via mining and importing, and therefore you're sort of closing the circular economy a little bit to reuse and domestic production as well.
Great. Yeah, that sounds amazing, and I'm sure some members of the audience might have some follow-up questions on that as well. Just a quick note, if you have any questions, this can be a pretty open Q&A. Just feel free to add it into the chat, and we'll get to those questions, and we'll have some more open Q&A time later on in the session as well. Why don't we move on to Sylvia? Sylvia, would you like to share a bit more about how you're working on climate in your current role?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm a senior product manager at Overstory. Overstory is a climate tech startup that is based in Amsterdam, but our team is working remotely all over the world. So I'm currently calling and working from Portugal. And Overstory is a vegetation intelligence platform. So we use satellite image and machine learning to know what is happening to vegetation all over the world. So we really believe that having better understanding of our trees, of our forests, and really the natural ecosystem in our world is very much needed to make better decisions about nature, to help with climate change, and also to protect biodiversity. And then in terms of how we use this information, so we could use it for a lot of different use cases. And right now we're really focusing on helping reduce wildfires and power outages for utilities, and also working with some deforestation projects. So my work as a product manager is really just focusing on understanding what are customer problems, what do they need, and help the team decide what to build, and focusing on these use cases to make sure that we get product market fit and we can build a scalable and useful product for our customers.
Great. Yeah, we have as you might know, Sylvia, we have a pretty thriving PM community within Work on Climate, and I'm sure some members of the audience today as well will be from that sub community and might have some questions for you, or we can delve a bit more into how product management specifically is related to climate work in a bit as well. Why don't we move on to Lena this time? Lena, do you want to share what you're working on?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, my name is Lena. I recently joined a startup called Andes, like mountains. And the main product of the startup is, so we use microbes to tackle climate change. I don't know if some of you are familiar, but in one handful of soil, there are the quantity of microbes is overwhelming, and that's more than ever like people lived on the planet Earth. So that many microbes we have in a handful. Handful, and they help basically plants to feed them, to I don't know, to capture carbon, to like to find like nitrates and fertilizers from the soil, and they are like pretty useful. So Andes found that some traits of like some of microbes are very, very helpful in capturing carbon from the atmosphere. So we basically want to give farmers an additional source of income by giving them this opportunity to apply our product, capture more carbon, and sell it as carbon credits. And yeah, I joined the operations team, so I'll be working solely on this carbon capture project.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And for those of you who don't know, Lena actually works on the Work on Climate events team as well. So Lena and I both work quite closely in organizing a lot of these events. Why don't we move on to, last but not least, Paul? Paul, would you like to share how you are currently working on climate?
Sure. My name is Paul Grock. I'm a senior software engineer at a company called 12. 12 takes CO2 and converts it into carbon monoxide, which can be used in making all sorts of polymers. We've had partnerships with Mercedes to make like a car part, and I can't remember the name of the eyeglasses company, but to make some lenses for some sunglasses. So we do a lot of things around that where we partner with Tide and another company to make some jet fuel. So basically we're taking carbon dioxide and inserting it into the kind of product pipeline and doing things around polymers that typically take carbon, that emit carbon dioxide and take that step out. And my role on this team is I'm on the internal tools team. So basically I'm working with a bunch of data scientists to help improve our technique around converting carbon dioxide.
I believe N12 used to be called something else prior, right? Prior to the rebranding, I think Opus.
It used to be called Opus 12, and now it's just 12.
Got it. Just for folks who might have encountered that name before. Okay, let's move on to some questions around your personal motivation for you working on climate, which is something I know that might resonate with a lot of folks in the audience. So a simple question for all of you on the panel: what first prompted you to work on climate? Maybe we can reverse the order this time. Paul, would you like to share first?
Sure. So for me, I kind of started thinking about working on climate a few years ago. I used to live in the Bay Area, and we had a particularly like rough fire season where it was, I don't remember, it was like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks in like November. It was just like, it looked like you were on Mars, and everything was like red, and it was just really brutal. And then my wife and I moved to Oregon a few years back, and then last summer, I think it was in like June, we had a 112-degree day here, and like it was, I don't know, 5 or 7 or 10 or something degrees above like whatever the previous record was. And I was just like, this is a real problem that I really have to like do whatever I can to face. And like, we're trying to do as much as we can, like in non-work times. And I was just like, I should focus my work hours on this too. So I started looking, and I got lucky enough to find 12, and start working there.
Great. Yeah, I definitely can personally resonate with that. I'm also in San Jose, California, and the 2018 wildfires were also kind of a call to action for me, just seeing the orange skies. So I can definitely relate to that myself. How about David? Do you want to share what first prompted you to work on climate?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess growing up, like I knew I really cared about nature, and that was sort of at the broadest level. And learning more throughout high school just really sort of picked up that this was a huge problem. And at the time, I guess I thought for a while that climate issues and the climate fight was essentially philanthropic. I guess for a while I just didn't put together that it was, a real industry that you could work in, and it was sort of like a save the penguins sort of thing. And as I went through college, and then at my first job, I really saw that there's real impact to be made, and it's a real business model. Like it's possible, and it's not just like out of the for the good-hearted. It's like you can really make it something that you can make your life out of. And sort of on the other side, I guess I just felt more and more paralyzed. Like I just in college especially, despite an interest in contributing to the climate fight, I guess I thought, okay, if this isn't something I can do, like there's nothing for me to do, right? And I think confronting the climate catastrophe really is very daunting. And so as individuals, we feel like we can't do anything or whatever. And I think that can put you in a real place of just like, okay, there's nothing for me to do. And actually that's just misguided. And I think that's kind of the thesis of work on climate, is that like you really can, right? You really can do something impactful. And so instead of like sort of sitting with my I don't know, anxiety about the climate catastrophe, I was like, you know what, I'm actually just gonna do something about it to the degree that I can, right? I may not be a PhD in like microbes for carbon capture, but I'll put my good brain to use. So that's kind of where I am now.
Great. Yeah. You definitely mentioned a few threads that I want to pick on a bit later, but before we do that, Sílvia or Lena, would you like to, add what prompted you to first work on climate?
Sílvia, you want to go first?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I think like for me, very similar to David. I think first of all, I think I was looking for purpose and impact. So I've been working in tech in the past 9 years, and like being honest, I love the tech world. I love the speed. I love like the innovation of it. I love the people that I work, super talented and nice people. But at the same time, after some time, I started questioning like, how can I use what I do and still like my job and still have a good, successful career and have an impact in the world, a positive impact, doing some kind of good. And I always thought that I need to pick one over the other, or if I want to actually help, I would probably need to become a climate scientist, or I need to go and study the science. So it never crossed my mind that I should actually combine my tech and product expertise to do something good. And then when I started exploring that possibility, I realized that existed right there. And there was like a lot of companies, especially in the climate tech world, that actually need people with my skills, and that would still have a mission to help us like build a better world. So when I realized that, it was kind of that haha moment that I need to do this sooner rather than later.
And I guess my climate journey started with plastic, when I started to mention, like I think it was like 5-6 years ago. I got really frustrated with trash on trails and all around. Like, I don't know, there was a festival in San Francisco on Mission Street, and people left it so dirty, and I just started like, okay, we need to recycle. Then I started to learn about the recycle, and quickly found out that it's not a silver bullet, and the problem is much bigger than just trash on the street. Yeah, and I just started to educate myself, and at some point, I guess the peak was when I found Eugene's post on LinkedIn saying that he cannot justify for himself working on like something not climate related anymore. And I felt the same, like there's no, I don't know, we don't have time to work on something else rather than climate anymore. So that's how, yeah, I came to this place.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for sharing that. I'm sure that, these themes are quite familiar to a lot of people in the audience as well. And they can definitely relate to a lot of this, as well as, see themselves in this journey as well. I wanted to go back to something that you mentioned, David, and also open this question up for the rest of the panel. So you were kind of talking about perhaps not being sure how your skills might apply, right? Like not having a tremendous amount of domain expertise. And I did notice, like when I was doing research into all of your past careers, that all of you are transitioning in, from various industries. For instance, Paul worked in the gaming industry for quite a bit. So I was just curious, like before you started your search for this current role, like after you realized that you wanted to work on climate, were you exclusively looking for climate oriented work, and trying to figure out how your skills might be applied, or was it something that was a priority for you, but you were also thinking about other types of work as well? Any of you can feel free to jump in if you have anything to share.
For me, I was just looking for climate related things. I had made the transition to doing, I was working at a company that was doing government services. So I'd already like kind of made the decision to do something that I thought was going to be more beneficial for other people, as opposed to doing something that's just, like whatever, like typical like San Francisco based startup is out there. So I'd already made that transition. And like I said, I was just like so worried about climate tech and or the climate change, and really thought I needed to put all of my effort into that. So I was solely looking for climate related roles. And I know as a software engineer, software is pretty prevalent pretty much everywhere. Everybody needs, like at the very least, like a website and whatnot. So I was pretty sure I'd be able to find something. It was just a matter of finding kind of the right fit and a company that matched my skills, and just I guess just focus only on climate related companies.
Great.
Yeah, for me, I can take it because it was very similar for me. So when I decided I want to move to and look for a job in climate tech, I think that my main thing is like I wanted a company that had climate at the core of its mission. So that was like the main thing I was 100% sure. And then of course I had a lot of questions, like inside the climate world, there's so many different areas and things that I like. And on that I struggle with like, where should I focus on, and which type of company? Do I want a small startup or a little bit bigger? And how can my skills apply? So there was like a lot of search inside that, but the core belief that I wanted a company that was really aligned with my values and focus in helping with the climate crisis, that was 100% defined.
Totally. I'd echo what Sylvia just said. I think once I sort of realized that that's what I wanted, it was exactly what I wanted, right? And I think something that just is useful is that, say, yes, like climate does fall into, say, ESG more broadly, but if you're looking at, the more specific you can be in your search, the more likely you're going to get something that you like out of it, I think, right? So climate, as Sylvia also said, right, is it's a big world. You could work in materials, you could work in food and ag, you could work in, the various types of energy, et cetera. It goes on and on, but kind of the more like you'd be surprised how many companies out there are really hiring and scaling. So the more specific you are in your interest and where you think you can be value add and where you want to be value add, I think it ended up being rewarding for me to sort of drill down to the level of specificity that I was capable of.
I don't have much to add to everyone's points on this. Like from my experience, when I just started my job search, there weren't that many operations role in climate tech, and at some point I got really frustrated and discouraged, and I was like, okay, maybe I should give up and look for something else. But eventually I landed the job in operations in climate, and I even had like 2 offers at the same time. So I guess my only advice to people would be just keep going, not give up, like, because I was there. I almost gave up, and I wouldn't be here if I did.
Yeah, I think Lena, that's a great point, and it's something that I wanted to ask some of the other panelists about as well. I know, Paul, you mentioned that, for instance, for engineering, there's a lot more flexibility, or there might be a lot more opportunities. It's more about finding the right fit for you. I particularly wanted to follow up with Silvia and David on this one. Perhaps their experience is a bit closer to Lena's, where it might seem like there's not that much applicability for prior experiences, in product management and so forth to this space. So is this a common misconception, do you think, or what, how would you address like some of these misgivings that people have, where they might think that their skills cannot apply to this space at all? Like, do you sort of see it differently now that you have made the transition? Is it easier to make that transition than perhaps people are, afraid of?
I can take that. Yeah, the new follow maybe. Yeah, so for me, like based on my experience, that's a big misconception. So you can totally work in climate even if you don't have domain expertise in climate. And that happened to me. I had 0 domain expertise in climate. I started learning a lot, but I never worked or actually knew much about like climate change and really understand the problem really deeply before start being interested in this space. But like, I think the thing is that especially in climate tech, like in the end, even if we have climate at the core of these missions, we are a company, and companies still have customers that they need to understand deeply. They still have a business to run with all the same functions, and they still can do a million stuff. So they need to define a strategy to decide where to focus. And that is like, it's not domain expertise, it's functional expertise that any company really needs. And if you don't have climate domain expertise, which is great if you do and can add a ton of value, but if you don't have that, which was my case, you can rely on your functional expertise and bring that to the company and then learn like all the climate related things and all your customer needs, because that's really what you do when you change companies to other industry or other types of technology. So I think like as long as you're not ready to learning something new, then you can totally do this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with what you said. I think it's important to remember that the scale of the solution to climate crisis has to meet the scale of the problem, right? Like, it's global. It is something that everyone is a part of, and something that everyone can work together to solve. Like, it really, no matter what your skills are, you can contribute them and be a big part of it. And like Silvia said, right, every company will still need eventually someone to do marketing, someone to do finance, someone to do like customer success or whatever. There are a lot of things that are more transferable than you think. And for what it's worth, yeah, like your previous role does really inform your current role. Like, even if you have industry experience in something that may not initially seem related, even in your new role, it will definitely have the effect of this 1 + 1 = 3, right? Where you may have known really in depth about, say, like the restaurant business, and now you work in food and ag, and actually one informs the other, right? Like, these things really do add up in ways that I think I've even found myself surprised by in my current role, given my previous role. But I think it really is you totally applicable.
But yeah, I think sorry, go ahead, Lena. You're on mute, Lena.
Oh, sorry. Just to add to that, I think also it's important to keep in mind that it's emerging industry, and still like many things, everyone's learning. Like, I don't know, carbon credits. It's not something that's set up yet. So it's really changing all the time. And there are almost no experts in this area yet. So it's okay for you not to be like an expert in some particular domain.
Great. Yeah,
Just
I think all of
to
that.
add to that, I will say, like, there's a lot of information out there. Like, there's, it's a very cooperative space. It's a very welcoming space. I think, like, if you want to learn something, there's an expert on it that is happy to teach you something, or they have a document that they can share or whatever. I think more than other industries I've seen, it's a space that really is cooperative. And I think you can become the expert that you want to be, so long as you want to be it.
Yeah, I think, all of your perspectives were quite insightful on this. There's a question on the chat as well. It's related to another question that I had that I wanted to ask Paul. So Anna asked in the chat, did you apply for open positions or rather reach out to companies you were interested in, even if the specific position was not listed? And then Paul, what I wanted to ask you related to something that you mentioned is, you said that you had already decided that you want to work within this space and you had like that commitment in your head, you had that clarity. And then it essentially came down to finding the right fit, or figuring out like this skills opportunity match. So what was your general approach, in finding that fit? And then perhaps you can also address, Anna's questions around applying to available opportunities or creating opportunities for yourself.
So I'll take that one first, since that seems more fun. I was just open opportunities. I wasn't, just like cold reaching out to places. I was pretty much just, going through like climate related job boards and seeing what was out there, and doing research on the companies, and seeing what their tech was like and what their company size was like, and those types of things before applying. Sorry, what was your question, Utkarsh?
Yeah, I was just wondering, can you just describe like your general approach, like of funneling from the opportunity down to deciding where the right fit might be for you?
I was just looking at things that were important to in my life. So like, I live in Oregon. I have a 14-acre farm. So, at first I was looking at like farm related, climate related places. And then, so that was part of filtering things down. And then I went to a job fair in I think it was like late August or early September, and I met with a bunch of, listened to a bunch of companies talk about what they do, and just got like a really good feeling from the folks at 12 who are speaking there. So that was part of filtering it out, was just like trying to find places that seemed like they aligned with my values, because even though climate obviously is like something that I value, there's definitely like a ton of like sub industries around that. So I looked at that, and then being a software engineer, I also looked at like the tech stack that is used by these various companies to find something that matched my skill set. And then also I've worked at small companies and large companies, and I really wanted to go back to like a smaller, like startup size company. So those are kind of the three filters that I use in looking at roles.
Got it. Just to dive a bit deeper into something you mentioned. So you mentioned there were like certain values you were looking for. Can you describe a bit more, like what are some of those markers that you were looking for within like the existing setup? Perhaps something not so much on the technical side, but related to like the principles that the company might have, or other things like that.
Yeah, so one of the things that impressed me about some of these companies is being like a public benefit corporation, or that type of like B Corp, because then that they're not just about like, okay, we're just trying to like make as much money as we possibly can from this. We're actually trying, part of our I'm not sure what the right word is, but like part of their like reason for being is to like make things better for people. So that was really a big deal. I looked at that, and like I was mentioning, just things that were important in my life, like I grew up in Hawaii, so like I looked at some like ocean-based startups, and like I have a farm, so I looked at farming related things, and just things.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And just one last follow-up, and we can move to the rest of the panel as well. I think you were touching on this notion of perhaps like greenwashing, that a lot of folks are kind of concerned about as well. Would you share like any tips on how to kind of gauge like the legitimacy of opportunities in terms of like the work that is being done? Like, how do you mark a company or an organization that's doing really good work? You mentioned like the Benefit Corp certification, but are there any other markers that you would advise people to look for?
I think it's important to know like who and what is behind like the company. If it's a startup, like see who is funding the company, or if it's something that's like a smaller portion. Like I talked with one company, and later on found out that they were like either partially or fully owned by like the shell company, and I was like, even though that's cool that they're trying to kind of transition away from being like just like an oil and gas company, like that's not something that fits with like my value set. So that was something else. So just kind of following the trail.
Yeah, I think that does make a lot of sense. So I'll repeat the question again for Sylvia, Lena, David. Can you just describe your general approach again when you were looking for opportunities before you started your current role? What does your process look like? Were there any learnings that you had as you went through that process?
Sure, I'll start then. Yeah, I guess I didn't look at it. I guess I looked at it from 4 sort of metrics, right? So I came from a background in VC in the software space, and so that was a market that I was familiar with, and so that's where my knowledge base was in VC in the B2B software space, and so I looked at it from the industry angle, the product angle, the role, and the team, right? So is the industry something that I care about? Is it one that I think is, poised for growth? Is it somewhere that's really impactful in terms of, carbon emissions reduction? And then thinking about like within that industry, is this product one that is going to be, super impactful and really help get that industry where it needs to be? And then thinking about, the team of like, are these the people that I think are, can take this product where it needs to go, and are, especially on the early stage startup, just thinking about, which is what I sort of knew I wanted, thinking about, are they, able to be leaders at a startup that scales? And then really it was mostly about role, right? Like, do I think that I can contribute in a meaningful way to the growth of this company, right? It's like, do the puzzle pieces fit where I think that, they being at this company will teach me and allow me to contribute, but then also being at this company, I can, be of service and make sure that it does grow well. So I guess those were the 4, pillars rather, that I was really thinking about in terms of, where I wanted to end up. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah, I can take it. So for me, it was funny because I'm normally a very rational person. So I would also have like my pillars, and this is like the type of companies I could go after. I'll see the roles and do like a big Excel and just go after it. But in this case, it was really different, much more intuitive than actually rational at some point. So first, I think when I started my climate journey, I was not looking for a job because I thought I'll probably need to do a master or something in climate. So it was just like a genuine curiosity in learning more about the space. So learning about the problem, learning about where the technology is at, what companies are doing. So I start basically all my media consumption was around that topic. So this happened last year. So I started reading and focusing a lot more on that. And then because I still have my normal job and I couldn't read as many books and watch as many documentaries as I would like, So I started reaching out to people, and like I think, as David was saying before, like he would be surprised how open and willing to help people are in the space. So I just started, like every time I saw someone or an expert, and it could be like in climate tech, or it could be like in government, or like in research, I would just reach out on LinkedIn with a message saying like why I like their work, why I was inspired, and if they could have like 30 minutes for a coffee chat. And a lot of people said yes. So I learned a lot like that. And then I started understanding like this climate tech space. So I always think of my search as like thinking big and then starting small. So the thinking big was just really these broad explorations about all the things climate relating, understanding the problem and the opportunities. And then when I started connecting the dots, I really focused and started small, meaning like narrow my focus and know like, okay, I want like a company that is climate focused. I want it to be a startup. I want like a product role, probably like around like nature-based solutions, because it was something that really excited me. And then I still continue my explorations, but narrowing down to those things that I already knew I want. But again, and to Anna's questions in the chat, like I didn't apply for any single job. It just, I reach out to companies to learn of what they're doing and how I could help. And then things just happen.
Just a quick follow-up for you, Sylvia. So for the role that you ended up actually being in at Overstory, was that something that you created a role, or was there an open position that you ended up?
It's actually a funny story. So I was just like a normal working day at lunchtime. I heard a podcast on my climate journey, and it was like Fiona was on the podcast, and Fiona was working at Overstory. And I loved the podcast. It was super inspirational. So after it ended, I just sent them a message on LinkedIn saying, hey, just thank you for the inspiration. It really made my day. And I didn't even ask for a coffee chat, which I would normally do. And she answered back and said like, yeah, well, I would love to meet. And at that point, they were not hiring for any product role. And then we chatted, and then we kept in touch. And 2 months after, when they opened their product role, they reached out to me saying asking if I was interested.
Great, yeah, like sounds very serendipitous. And perhaps Lena, you've kind of had maybe a bit of the opposite journey where you almost kind of had given up or lost hope before this worked out. So I'm just wondering, like, what was the approach that you had like in finding these opportunities, and what actually do you think, reflecting, you might have done better, or what did you do well now that you're on the other side?
I would definitely, if something I would done differently, I would go as Sílvia did with reaching out to people. I didn't feel like confident enough to just reaching out and asking for help. I don't know, maybe it's just like my personal issue, but yeah, eventually I applied to job postings, but also I don't know if it's not similar to Sílvia's, but still, like, it was a bit different. I applied to even like entry-level roles, even though like I did have some experience before, because I just wanted to transition to climate like badly, and they didn't have there weren't many operations position at the moment, but like with many companies it went like this way. I would apply for entry-level role with a cover letter, and I would just tell why I want to work in the company and why I want to why I like what company does. And it turned out like in many cases people would suggest me another position, and here was at my current position, it was the same. I applied for like entry level, but they were like, okay, we've never seen anyone wanting to work on climate that bad, like, okay, let's find something for you. And yeah, that's how the role was created basically.
Great. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. We can move on to an open Q&A. So, for the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to put it into the chat. And of course, if you would like to ask it yourself, you can unmute yourself and ask a question also. In the meantime, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. Maybe let's do the Lydia one first. I think it's a bit more straightforward. So what kind of timeline did you experience? When did you start, from when you first started considering working in climate to actually starting the position? Like, what was the length of the journey for you?
Yeah, I can share mine. So I think in total it was around 9 months. So I did 5, like from the moment I started interested in learning more about climate, I did like 5 months of like broad exploration without looking for any jobs, just learning, meeting people, knowing the space. And then 5 months after I started focusing, and then I focused for 4 months until I get my job.
Similarly, mine was not super quick. I'd say it probably took me maybe from the point at which I realized I wanted to get involved in the space to like when I was really being specific in what I was looking for. And then when those conversations really, got moving, it took really from start to finish, probably around 5-6 months. So, I mean, especially if that I will say for people that feel like that might be too long, I'd say there are, I think, every day more and more roles out there that are just in like these public forums. And I think those timelines are getting crunched. So like, you probably may have to do a little bit less research because more is just in front of you. And also those, recruiting boards, those job boards are probably in more places. And so I think over time, this will get more up and running, but yeah.
For me, it was a bit longer. I think I started to consider transitioning to climate a year ago, but then like in a few months, in like 4 or 5 months, I started to actively apply for jobs, and it took me like 6 months to land the job.
For me, it was about 4 months, I'd say, from the time I really decided that it was time to, get into climate tech to the time I accepted the job at 12.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question from Shreya. Did any of you consider seeking higher education to deepen expertise in your areas of focus? I think this also speaks to, some of the domain knowledge gap points that we discussed earlier, but did any of you consider going back to school to deepen your expertise?
Yeah, so I mean, I know Sylvia touched on it a little bit, but I will say I did really think about it. I think what actually proved really useful was I clearly ended up not doing it. I went straight to my job, but I did get a lot of benefit out of a bunch of sort of email newsletters and joining a bunch of Slack groups like Work on Climate, among other things. And I think you can get an informal education relatively quickly. As I said before, I think you can talk to experts with relative ease. If you, try to connect with people on LinkedIn and, message someone in a Slack group, whatever whatever works for you. Certainly I'm, open, my Slack and LinkedIn are open for your, questions, but I'll say, yeah, I think there are a lot of ways to get an informal education rather than going through a course. Not to discredit that, obviously that's super useful as well. But if you work as a PM and you want to figure out how to be a more climate forward PM, I guess, talking to someone like Sylvia would probably be wonderful. Or if you want to work, and so on and so forth. I think there are ways to do it in a little more casual way.
Yeah, and just adding to that, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, just adding to, so for me it was very much the same. So I look at masters, like 2-year masters, and thinking like, should I do this? So I consider a lot of that. And then I decided not to do it because personally I'm a much more like hands-on type of person. I prefer like to start building things or start like doing the job and learning while doing it. But I did do like some kind of boot camp. So on Terra.do, which I don't think it's like needed to get the job. And I got the job actually when I applied to the course, but I still thought it was very useful, especially like, so after doing a lot of learning like on my own, just having this like system perspective that puts everything together and helps organize your thoughts, for me was super valuable from a purely knowledge perspective.
Sílvia, I had the same experience. Yeah, I also was thinking to apply to masters here in San Francisco, but then I just decided, okay, I'll try to take this boot camp, like 12-week, because 2 years sounds like too much, and we don't have this time. We need, as again, outlining the urgency of the problem. Like, it was always something I felt in my climate journey. And I went to this Terra.do, and I 100% agree with Sílvia that it's a great resource. They just combined like everything that so most of the things I've heard somewhere or I read somewhere that I learned at Terra.do, but they just collected everything for you. And yeah, I think it's really important also for people to learn how urgent the problem is, and they show it through the course.
For me, I didn't really consider going back to school or anything like that. I did think about the Terra.do like climate courses that Sylvia and Lena both mentioned. Those seemed like they would be really helpful. But for me, as a software engineer, I've been in a couple of industries that I don't really, or didn't really when I started the position, have a lot of domain expertise. So I knew that I could bring kind of expertise in software, in building software to those companies, and hopefully along the way I could pick up more of the domain expertise that's necessary to be proficient in my job.
Great, yeah. There's a question around your favorite resources for learning about climate. Terra.do is something that many of you mentioned. David, you also mentioned kind of tapping into the broader community, or seeking advice or guidance from folks that have that expertise. I was just wondering, related to this theme, including work on climate as a community, what advice would you have for current members in maximizing the leverage from this community, or maximizing their use of all the available resources, including like other forms of media, the work on climate community itself, the office hours, and so forth? Like, do you have any advice on how job searchers might spend their time the most effectively?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'd say, I mean, I'm sure everyone will have a different experience between myself, Paula, and Sylvia, but I think the best way to start is however you're comfortable, really. Like, if you have a friend and you're both looking to do something, maybe you can start by comparing notes with them, or if you're more private about it, maybe just subscribing to a newsletter that's informative and you can read through it. Making sure you continue in the process of it is really important. I mean, I will say something that I found really important was to, as I was learning things, to sort of try to develop my own thoughts and my own theses on things. And so that way I could be more specific in where I wanted to end up. Also, I think, communication is always the answer. I think, the more you can have conversations with people, even if it's a one-off, or even if it's a 20 minutes that doesn't lead to anything, one of them will, even if it's not, directly going to be a job offer, or, not going to lead to an interview. I think just the more data points you can gather, and then the more you can sort of bring those data points together, I think it is kind of always the answer. Yeah, and I think you should always veer on keeping other people in the loop of your progress, rather than trying to do it yourself, because I promise there's an infrastructure that's there to help you if you want it.
Sílvia, you want to add something to it?
Yeah, I can
just see you want to jump in, and but hesitate.
Yeah, so all that resonates a lot, like with me, like specific with the work on climate community, I think it's really useful to find like climate tech companies. Like even like if you go to the jobs channel, even if it's not the right job for you, you can still think like, okay, this company, would I see myself working in it? What could I do? You could go and see which type of positions they're hiring. So I got to know a lot of companies just doing that. And then the other part, I think like just reaching out to the community really. So there's first thing there's so many people looking for a job and there's so many things that need to be done. It's inspiring and you don't feel like alone anymore, especially like if at least my closest friends, they're not so much talking about climate. So reaching out to communities on work on climate is really refreshing. So we can talk and discuss about this stuff. And then even sometimes just looking for experts, there's a lot of people in the community that would be willing to help. And again, as David said, a funny thing is like, sometimes like your goal is just really to learn and you don't have like any goal. I remember in my first coffee chat, it just felt weird at first. I was like, okay, I don't have any goal really. I just want to learn and I'm curious. And that's fine. Like your goal can be just like learning and asking questions.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning that, Sylvia. I guess that was the so that's why I haven't reached people at the beginning, because I was just scared not having like something specific to ask for or to give back something. But as much it was like I started to be involved in the community more and more, like meeting people, even though it was not really something that I'm comfortable with. I then started to volunteer there, and that really gave me the sense of like community, and I didn't feel like alone anymore. I feel like that so many of us there, and we all want to do the same, or want the same thing. We have same goal. So yeah, reaching out to people, that's something that worked for me. But I definitely wasn't comfortable at the beginning with it.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that last point. But yeah, I'm not super comfortable reaching out to people in the way that Sylvia and Lena sounds like they both did. So for me, it was mostly just kind of passive, like consumption of things like, you know, subscribing to newsletters, listening to podcasts, lurking on the Work on Climate Slack and other places like that, and just kind of like looking around and seeing, you know, who was hiring and researching those companies, and you know, just kind of looking on my own time, you know, without like talking to other folks, which probably would have been a good idea, but isn't something that I'm super good at. So.
Great. So we're just about coming to the top of the hour. So I have one final question for the panel before we wrap up, and I want to kind of turn the tables, if you will, and ask you, you know, are there any ways in which the climate community can support you or your work? Is there any way that the broader climate community can get involved?
On my side, we are hiring for a lot of exciting roles. So both in tech for software engineers and machine learning engineers, but also in sales and marketing. So if you are interested, we can go to overstory.com/careers. And of course, I'm biased, but we're a very nice team. So we will, like, if you're interested, feel free to reach out with questions or just apply directly. And yeah.
Yeah, pretty much same for me. 12.co/careers. We're hiring for all kinds of things. You know, we raised a pretty large Series A in the middle of last year, so we got lots of good funding. We've got we're really rapidly growing right now. We're hiring technical and non-technical positions, operations, biz dev, all kinds of things. If you want to hit me up on Work on Climate or on LinkedIn or whatever, I'm Paul Grock on both of those, or on Twitter or whatever. Yeah, so or you can just feel free to apply directly. 12 has been great. I've only been there like a month or 6 weeks, so obviously I don't have a super in-depth knowledge of how things are going, but so far it's been great.
Yeah, and I'll echo the same thing at the risk of being redundant. We're hiring always on the PM side, on the sort of for full stack engineer, and then for account executives as well currently, and I'm sure, more again soon. I will also say, open to conversation for people who don't fit those roles necessarily, as, I'm sure each of the four of us also has friends in other companies that are hiring for different things. And so always just good to connect, but I will also put just in the chat where our careers page is. But anyway, yeah, I think I'd say always just be able to connect.
Great point, David. Thank you. Yeah, same here. We applied to, we had conversations with many companies. So yeah, reach out directly and ask, maybe we know someone from the inside. And in terms of Indies, we don't have many open positions at the moment, but we're gonna be growing and gonna grow our operations team. So yeah, just follow the page, and we'll post everything on Work on Climate for sure.
Great. Well, thank you again for spending so much time with us and sharing all of your insights and just sharing about your journey. I can see a lot of other thank yous coming through from the audience as well. It looks like everybody found the conversation quite insightful. So thank you again for spending an afternoon with us, and have a good rest of the week.